Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I got some stuff to get to, news-wise. CNN. I talked about how they reached a new low in my previous video when Dana Bash asked Lindsey Graham to play the game. Who would you marry? Who would you date? And she changed the game to who would you get rid of? And wouldn't let it go. Like he couldn't play the game because he's just, I don't know, incompetent mentally. You guys saw my video. It's kind of hilarious. But they've done something now where they're covering the Drake-Kendrick Lamar feud and making it news because they're that desperate, right? And so, that's where the news is, right? That's where mainstream media is being reduced to ridiculous little, bar games and, pop culture stuff just to try to bring in an audience that no longer exists for them. And I'll get to that in just a bit. That's that's their thing, right? But in terms of, I want to talk about Pockets of the Future, the name of this channel, and the Pockets of the Future movement. Where the name came from and what this channel's been about. So I have a video that's coming out on Apocalypse Now. I kind of realized that that channel has almost become a waste of time for me because of the lack of money that's being made. And, the views are down a little bit. But really it's just about YouTube not running ads. My channels are no longer financially viable. And I'm having to deal with that. There's going to have to be some changes, what I talked about. And I'm going to make some changes there. I'm going to make less content there because it's just kind of a waste of time. And I'll, that's my other channel. And there'll be a video out, I think, tomorrow from that. I'm not sure which video is going to come out first. But these videos are intertwined. And somebody left a very kind of thoughtful comment to my Journey series. And I'm going to probably put this audio in that as well. It's just kind of every once in a while, it's time to evaluate your, what you're doing, right? In terms of your, something like this, it's almost like a movement in a way, right? The Pockets of the Future movement. And this video is about humanity and, where we are collectively and what the Pockets of the Future interacting with humanity, what I've done here, interacting with humanity and what that says about humanity, right? Because, I've done whatever job I've done. You really can't evaluate your own work. I could have been more personable, I could have changed some things. But I feel like I've done an adequate job of what I was assigned because this is, to me, a divine, mandate kind of thing, a divine, work, because it came from a spiritual experience. So years ago, when I started doing the Sajmarg meditation, I became a preceptor in 1995. And I learned about some spiritual stuff. There's a thing called a sankalpa where, when you become a spiritual person, sankalpa is something that I think everybody does, but it's it's a Sanskrit word for using your will in a, with some sort of divine, providence or divine instruction to create something, using your human will force to follow a divine mandate, right? And manifest something, make something happen in the material world based in, God's instructions to you and your spiritual experience and your, whatever it is. So it'd be like manifesting something that needs to happen, like, the collapse of the civilization, some kind of work that's done. The second master of the Sajmarg system was given these orders to intervene with humanity and change the course of humanity. So it could be on a large scale, it could be a war happening. On a small scale, it could be, helping somebody who's, has terminal illness have miraculous recovery or something, right? Because of their importance and contributing something, right? It's to, you know, I wouldn't call it like a miracle, but to, you know, use your God-given abilities to do work that needs to happen for the divine plan to manifest in a certain way, right? But there's these various, you know, things that you do on a spiritual level. And there's a thing called the Shruti, which is a like a program that's given to a spiritual person to do some sort of work. And, you know, I read all these things and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, right? You know, I didn't think much of them. You know, I didn't think they applied to me or whatever it is, right? I didn't think it was going to be something that, you know, would happen to me. Like the thing is, there's lots of spiritual people or semi, you know, I don't call spiritual people, New Age people. Like if you talk to the New people in New Age community, you'll find that many of them say their Kundalini has been opened, you know, because of Kundalini yoga and, you know, Hatha yoga, these different things. And it hasn't, right? And, you know, I talked about this before, and I had about 10 people who commented, said, no, my Kundalini's open, right? Because if your Kundalini's open, the sheer power that you would have, and it's low-level power, it's more of a material power than a spiritual power. But the power that's involved is something significant. And the majority of people who had their Kundalinis open go like insane and have like a spiritual fall because they're not disciplined enough, right? They're not strong enough to handle it. You guys remember from the, you know, the Infinity Stones from the Avengers, you know, that like it, you know, using the Infinity Glove almost killed Thanos, and it, you know, messed Hulk up, and, you know, these were powerful beings, and it killed Tony Stark, who was Iron Man, because he didn't have any, he was weak physically, he couldn't even handle the power, right? And that's the problem with spiritual powers, that you have to be pure and disciplined, and your capacity has to be there to handle them, right? And so there are things that you hear about in yoga. You hear about these spiritual powers. You hear about saint. You know, you see the lives of saints, and there's a lot of failure because of the weakness of the human being, right? The unevolved nature. Like we have potential, we have divine potential, like everything else, and, you know, maybe it's because of our, you know, we were created as a slave, and there's, you know, genetically, and, you know, these things. But human beings usually struggle when given divine powers. Like they, you know, they can't handle it. And so, you know, I was never personally thinking that when I was reading about these things that that's one of those things would happen to me, right? Uh, because of, you know, kind of a slacker. You know, I mean, I was into you know, I was really into the Sajmark system, but not, you know, in some way where I would, you know, given my character qualities, given my concern and my, you know, level of devotion and things, that, you know, something like that would happen to me. But in 2003, you know, years later after I'd learned about these things, you know, I was now a dad, and, you know, I'd gotten my master's in counseling, and, you know, I'd had some, you know, progress and success in my, you know, I was a low functioning person before that, right? You know, I just was somebody lost and not very, you know, focused, and, you know, was an underachiever, right? And so underachievers, and, you know, being introverted and dyslexic, and, you know, some of the things that you know, make me different than other people. You know, I just was never, I don't really have a lot of ambition and things like that, right? And so, you know, it came to me as a surprise. But I was meditating at a group meditation, and I felt this, you know, it was a powerful, like, energy. You know, I can't even describe it, but it was like my ears were ringing, and it was like something different than a normal meditation. And it lasted, I think, you know, 5-6 minutes. And when it was done, I was like, there was something that was like downloaded into my system, like you'd see in the Matrix movie, you know, something spiritual. And I said to my ex, I think I just had a shruti, right? Which is, in the Sanskrit, it is, it means to hear. You know, which is, I've always had audio things. I always have these kind of ringing in my ears and whatever it is. But it means to hear. And it was significant. Like I had just all these ideas, like a whole thing I was supposed to do. And I started something called Pranhuiti Counseling, and I hadn't really been on the internet. I had a computer I wrote a book on that was more like a word processor. It was a Coleco computer, but I didn't have a kind of a modern cell phone. No cell phone at all. Like I didn't have a cell phone until 2013 or 14, right? So, but I had never been on a computer like where I was on the internet. Like I didn't even know how to do it. And so I wrote, but I just like learned all those things. I learned how to use PowerPoint. I made a PowerPoint presentation. I learned how to do front page. I mean, in a period of like a week or two, I learned all these things. I learned about the internet. And, a few years later, I started my first YouTube channel. These things. Like as soon as like I was able to do that, like I had the technology to do that. And so, the first parts is I put together like a presentation. And I wrote a book, and it was about transforming abuse, and it was a workbook that had all these things because I was a counselor. I had a master's degree in counseling, and the Pranhuiti counseling services, was a whole thing. I learned how to do all these things, and it was like I was energized and like I had purpose and I had a vision, and I was just applying these things to what I was doing. And then, this phase 2 was called Pockets of the Future. That was the phase 2 of the idea. And the idea, this is again back in 2003, it wouldn't really start going until about 2007 when I said, all right, the first thing didn't pan out, the Pranhuiti counseling, and mostly because I wasn't personable, and, I didn't really like counseling people. I didn't like working with people. I had these things that, tools that people could use. But my years working as a counselor and a therapist, a clinician, I wasn't necessarily good at it. I just don't have good people skills and, these things. And, even as a preceptor, I struggled working with people, right? But phase 2 was something different because the idea of pockets of future came to me that we were entering a transitionary time. Like everyone can kind of see it now. But no one was really looking at this, I mean, there's always end of the world people. And I'm not an end of the world person, even though it sounds like I am. But I knew that the end of our civilization was coming. Just I did. Like I knew it because of this divine program that was put in my system. And how it felt like it was like I had, a responsibility now. And so, Pockets of Future idea was that when there is a collapse of civilizations, which has happened so many times in human history, beyond our ability to record them, because most of the ancient runes and things that we have are about 5,000 years old, right? The pyramids are really old, like you have some things like that. And once in a while they dig up a civilization that's 30,000 years. And there's some things buried under the sea. And artifacts that they have that they won't let you have, or they won't let you, the average person, know about. There's some artifacts out there that show that, there's been human beings on planet Earth for like millions of years. And that, more evolved human beings and, whatever, extraterrestrial, whatever it is. But in terms of our history, it's about 5,000 years, right? But it's much more than that. There are things that happen, like ice ages. There's more polar ice. And when there's more ice, there's more land. Like a lot of things that are under the ocean now. When there's an ice age, there's more land. Of course, there's more, it's colder in the northern regions and southern regions, on the poles of the earth. But there's more land, and then when that ice melts, that land goes underwater. And so there's lost civilizations just from that process, right? The poles reversing, north becoming south, south becoming north. That happens every 200,000 years. And then there's just, the movement of the tectonic plates and things, natural movements, and then there's self-inflicted civilization collapsing. And it happens all the time, where human beings, rise up to a high level of technology, and then there's some kind of, weakness and lack of. I mean, it's just like success breeds, the things that we see with people with entitlement and apathy and idiocracy, all these things, and civilizations collapse, but human beings remain. And so I thought about that, the ideas came to me that there has to be people who see the collapse coming and they adjust themselves in such a way that they can survive the collapse and that they can do something on the other side, right, of the collapse. And, it's a real thing, right? It has to be that way. Because if the majority of people are 100% dependent on a system, a government, whatever it is, like a village-based, family model, tribal people, right? They have, the people develop into some sort of a structure that they survive, that keeps all the people going, right? Like we have in our system, like our grocery stores and automobiles and electricity and things that, we need to conduct our daily lives, and we have a lifestyle that we get used to, and we have, all these things, right? And then there's a massive earthquake, or because usually it's like a city, right? It's not global. Well, there's been global civilizations before, but it wasn't, always that way. But you find ancient ruins everywhere. You go there, Rome and Greece, and you go to India. They've just dug up some, the Indus civilization that's 30,000 years old, and there's ancient ruins all over the world of massive cities that were once empires that no longer exist. And there's almost no evidence or no, nothing that we have that we think is, there's been inventions and things, and whatever it might be, but in terms of those civilizations' effect on us, it's not existent. Even though it has been, there's been an evolution of human beings here. Like there's big civilizations that collapse, and there's almost no memory of it. I mean, there's no memory of it. Like lots of them. There's ones that we have no idea about. And then there's just some ruins, right? But in terms of people themselves, there's a transition, and some people make the leap, right? There's a story that's told. It's about death, but it also applies to this civilization. It was told in the Sajmark tradition, by the master of the system. There once was a kingdom in which they would have someone become king for only a year because they would get corrupt. It's just a story that needs to be there for the purpose of the story, but the reasoning behind that is they'd have a king for a year, and the kings would all get corrupt and hedonistic, and they would just be, worthless after that. And so once the king's year was up, they'd banish the king to the other side of the river. He could never come back to the city. And so they would have somebody be a king, and it was like winning the lotto. And that person would indulge in every types of pleasure and all kinds of decadent things that, kings do, right? And then be banished the next year, but they'd have one good year of partying, right? But then there was this one guy who decided to use the year to build a kingdom on the other side of the river. He used all the resources at his disposal to where he was going to be banished and to build a separate kingdom, a better one on the other side of the river. And that story is supposed to be, metaphor for death. That most people come into life and they party, and they indulge, and they become pleasure-based people, thinking only of self gratification and pleasure. But there are some spiritual people that use their life to build a future after they die, on a spiritual level, right? But this also applies to what I'm talking about here in terms of pockets of the future, that you use what you're given right now to build something for not only yourself, but other people, younger people, that will survive in a post-apocalyptic situation. That once the civilization collapses, that you have something, not just materially. In fact, this isn't as important materially, but what you become on the inside as a spiritual purpose, a spiritual person that finds a spiritual purpose in a pre-apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic time, right? And so, That's pockets of the future, that people would start working on themselves, spiritually most of all, because the people who are going to survive this. The other part of pockets of the future is you would understand what's going to be the rule of the day, or what's going to be the dominant aspect of the next phase, right? And so right now, money and money power and, the things that dominate our existence, any kind of, religious power and all these things, manipulating people, lying. I mean, lying's a big thing right now. Being able to lie and deceive, and, sociopaths do really well right now. But they won't do well in the future because the energy is going to change, and, there's going to be a time of redemption. And, the kind of person that would succeed right now is going to fail in the future, right? People who are successful right now financially, and, narcissists and selfish people who are rewarded for their selfishness in our current paradigm, in the next paradigm, they won't be rewarded, right? Because their energy is going to change. And so you have to become that kind of person. You have to become a person of the future, right now, pockets of the future, and people working together to form little pockets of the future where they can build a community, because that's the next phase, right? And some of this I understood on a spiritual level from doing the Sagemark system, which is, going to be done in one form or another by everybody. Meditating on the divinity inside of you, connecting with the part of you that's divine, like that's the future for humanity. And I'm, 100% sure of that. And so that's part of my message here, a big part of my message. But another part of my message is the material aspect. And my family and I transitioning from our, being suburban people, being people who were dependent on the system, to doing some homesteading. And I learned something, and I talk about this quite a bit. One of the things these are two of the kind of unique aspects of my channel, right? As opposed to other truther channels or just YouTube channels in general, is that I have a purpose here in terms of disseminating information and helping people to prepare for what's coming, right? And what I realized was there was a period of time where our ancestors, who have all the skills, had all the skills that all of us are going to need. Village-based people, who lived in, village-based family farms, and tribal people, and it's all the same thing, tribal people who had, the ability to function as a unit and survive off the resources around them and have a connection with nature and things like this. And I realized that those people at some point had to give up their lifestyle, either by choice. They are offered a deal. Give up all your skills as a person. Because when I was homesteading, I realized all the skills that that we had all lost. These things aren't all that hard, but to do them collectively and be in a rhythm and a flow and sort of, understand, be able to read nature and be able to ride the ebbs and flows of the natural world, and be able to, bring in food and shelter and do all the things that we, our system now does for us. Going to grocery stores and having, these houses built for us. But having all those skills, the way that tribal people and, village-based farm people had, there was a loss of those skills. And people were much better. They are, this idiocracy thing. There was a de-evolution that happened because a deal was offered that you would get you'd work for, whatever it was back then, 8 to 16 hours a day, and you would have one specialized skill, and you'd live in like a colony type situation where you were like a worker bee, and you had one job, and that one job paid you money, and you could get all the other things you need with that money. That was something new. This is something that we all, we live with, but that was, it wasn't something that existed in previous civilizations. Not like it is now, because people had to do everything. People had to grow food. You had to be multifaceted, and you had to do all kinds of different work, and you didn't have very much free time because you spent most of your time surviving. The free time wasn't, the time to just leisure time was not anything like it is now. And people misuse this leisure time instead of evolving personally and growing, intellectually and spiritually. People just indulge. And that's the problem with human beings. Given the choice of free time, they don't do anything to improve themselves and change and evolve spiritually and connect to God. They indulge in pleasure-based type of, activities. They just do things for personal pleasure. And that's, one of the failures of the human beings. Given the gift of free time and the choice to use your time, in a way that, any way possible for your, betterment, you have all these, it's free time, right? What do you do with your free time? Well, most people spend it indulging in something and not, in self-improvement. And so anyways, those were the purposes of the Pockets of the Future movement. That's what Pockets of the Future means. This was the job I was given, the divine aspect of the job. And at some point I realized I had to cover celebrities and politics, and, I had to use, humor and things and, different talents I had to make my videos interesting to the people who didn't care about spirituality, didn't care about, homesteading, or people who weren't able to, gravitate to the idea that the civilization was collapsing. I had to entertain people to whatever extent with my videos, but then get some of these messages in, at least, in a more subtle way. I mean, not necessarily subliminal, but just say these things in the course of covering other things that they were interested in, right? Because there's so many people interested in Hollywood and so many people interested in, all these things. And the majority of truthers, people making truther content, the whole Alex Jones models of InfoWars, because Alex Jones is a shill. One of the ways you can tell he's a shill is I'm getting his Facebook and his Twitter recommended to me all the time. And that's the only person that's a truther I get recommended. All I get recommended is right-wing truthers who are not real truthers at all. People who are embracing the Republican Party and Trump. And, you're not a truther if you're doing that. You're not anything. Like, you're just, people who think that you're not awake if you think Trump is the answer, or if you think there's an answer at all. And so the majority of truth community can't accept that the civilization's collapsing and that there's nothing you can do to save it. And it's good freaking riddance, right? We should allow it to collapse because it's bad for all of us. It's bad for the planet. It's endangering the planet and human beings and the future of human beings. The system is going in the wrong direction. It's like being, a crack addict or, the worst kind of anything, right? It's the dregs of humanity taking people in the wrong direction and making us weaker and stupider. Human beings are getting worse. And you can see it. Like, everyone knows it. Like, the kids today are less than we are, and we weren't that great. And we are less than our, the previous generation, right? People are getting, are lower and lower functioning. And that's because of our system and the way the direction it's taking us. And so it has to go. Like, the system has to go. And if it makes you scared, it's because you're not prepared, right? Pockets of the Future. It's because you're not ready for it. Emotionally and spiritually more than anything else. But then, in terms of your physical preparation and understanding that things end and new things begin and people have to adjust to that, right? So, I'm not the only person doing this, but specifically, naming my channel Pockets of the Future and understanding a higher purpose to this, that people are going to have to reach up and, within themselves, reach inward and pull out a better version of themselves, beyond the tribal skills. This isn't about lifestyle and living in a tribal way, living in a, agrarian hunter-gatherer way. It's not about that. That's part of it. There's lots of preppers out there, and there's lots of people who know more about prepping and homesteading and things and preparing for the apocalypse. And that's a part of what I'm talking about. But it's something more than that. It's more profound than that. It's connecting to the divine purpose and throwing away your goals of human life now, whatever they are. Whatever people, the things that they have goals of, living for the weekend, or living for the holidays, and, whatever things that they do to get their, to deal with their miserable existence and their crappy wage slave jobs and all these things. Living, just for distractions and pleasures and things. but reorienting yourself and connecting to your soul and have a soul-driven existence is something, unique to my channel, with the prepper stuff and with the idea that there's intention here, right? But there's people who, have some pieces of this, right? But I have, like, a more comprehensive understanding based in, the divine, program that was delivered to me. And so, and I don't want to make it sound bigger than it is, or, make me sound more impressive than I am, right? Because, at the heart, I'm a kind of a slacker, and, I am what I am, right? This is also about the way that, people who know about the heartfulness stuff, right? The heartfulness collapse of the Sajmark system into this, cult-like heartfulness organization, which I've documented in the Journey series and things like this, right? Somebody just gave me a really, interesting comment that I'm going to respond to about, their, interpretation of what, my role is or whatever it is. And, it's limited to this specific, whatever the Shruti was in this program that, I've, I built a website, I, built a YouTube channel, I wrote books, these things, all the work that I did to get these simple ideas out. That divinity, the divinity that resides within you, that God is in you, and you have a soul and you have a purpose. Everyone has a, divine purpose, embracing that purpose, and then, beginning to prepare yourself for, a apocalyptic changes, and being able to build communities, these little pockets of future all over the place where people are living now the way that everyone's going to live in the future, right? And, there was pockets of the future being created by the third master of the Sajmark system, like he didn't call him that. But there was that element of that. At least in India, there was, there's groups of people sort of coming together, these spiritual centers, on a spiritual level, right? But not so much understanding the, some of these were older people who didn't care and they weren't going to, they're just going to check out, right? The older people just won't make it. And, I'm starting to fall into that category to where, you just, your time is limited. And in a apocalyptic situation, old people just don't, they don't have the physical strength and the ability to change and adapt. They're set in their ways. And so it's always for the youth, right? It's always for young people to be able to carry this through. And, start building these things and creating little communities of people, little neighborhoods of people, little communities of people who are going to be able to, absorb the initial shock of the apocalypse, and then, and then thrive and, survive the, difficult times, and then create something new, a different human being with different orientation to the world on the other side, right? And so it's kind of it's an interesting, noble, kind of a cool idea. So it's been around for, since 2007. My YouTube channel, the ideas of this thing, I started Fruity Counseling in 2003 or whatever it was initially. And, the time that I've done this. So, whatever, period of time, and the YouTube channel's existed since 2007. And then, so that's, what is that? 17 years. So this idea's been out for 17 years. This idea, something called Pockets of the Future, with this, central idea. And there's been, I've had hundreds of millions of views on my videos. So of course, the videos that are privatized, some I have all these privatized videos. I have all these videos that were deleted, but it's, probably a couple hundred million views on my videos, right? So that's significant. So I've reached millions of people, right? Millions of people have, been in contact with something called Pockets of the Future. And in that I have about 5,000 people who maybe it's 20,000 people, but might get regularly about anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 views on my videos. And the shadow banning, sure. There's been things that have happened. I've a couple 100,000 subscribers, which is the, amount of people who are willing to hit the subscribe button. And out of those subscribers, there is, maybe 5,000 people who regularly watch my videos some people can't keep up with the content. So let's say it's 10. Let's just be generous. 10,000 people regularly watch my content. Out of those 10,000 people, there are maybe 1,000 people who tried the Sajmarg method of meditation. And maybe out of those people, there's, 100 people still doing it, right? So they're doing the spiritual part of it. Very few people are doing any sort of, some people are gardening, right? Some people have, whatever. Like, people have to figure out, it's not for me to say what you should do. I'm not the judge of your success, of your interaction with Pockets of the Future. There's people who said that, I've changed their life in some way. The content, it got them through tough times, get them through their days, whatever it might be, these things. And so there's all of those things, right? And, there's people who leave very thoughtful comments, people who are, really, whatever they are. They're good people. They're worthwhile people, right? There's 168 members of, who are willing to financially support the channel. There's other people who give, random donations. So that's something. There's, some hundreds of people, willing to spend their hard-earned money to, keep this thing going, at a time where without membership, there would be no channel at this point. Like, I'm making almost no money off the YouTube ads now. And pretty soon I'm going to have to go to a completely subscription-based model because YouTube is worthless. And I don't want to get into all that because I've been talking about that. I'm going to talk about that on my other channel, not just the shadow banning, but, all of it. And so some of it has been thwarted, to view me as a problem to society, where algorithms and machine, these bots and, AI or whatever they're using would exclude and try to hide my channel from people and squeeze me financially. Their channel's not doing any kind of damage because I'm not trying to take the system down. I'm not doing any damage to the system. In fact, I said, it's going to fall naturally. You spend your time preparing yourself for that. Again, that's the idea behind the channel. Spend your free time and energy either spiritually, or materially or whatever it is, preparing for this inevitability. Because all civilizations collapse. And so many people, there's so many movies, there's so many, people focused and kind of get, when I first started this, very few people were seeing it. Now everybody sees it a little bit, right? And so, I was given this, vision. I was given this divine, mandate and work to help people prepare for the inevitable that now people are starting to see, right? Now people are starting to catch up to this idea and are, aware that the civilization's collapsing. You have two political candidates that are saying if the other guy gets elected, it's the end of the world. One candidate saying, Joe Biden saying that he's trying to save the soul of America, which is stupid and, like goofy. But that's, apocalyptic talk, right? Like they're all embracing it. But they're all embracing it in a way where they are making some money to tell you they could stop something. They're getting money and power, and not just the politicians, but everybody who's embracing this apocalyptic view. They're saying we can stop it, right? If you embrace us, we'll stop it. And they can't. Nobody can. It can't be stopped. The end of our civilization's already written. It's already a part of the future, right? And so those people who can accept that and be grateful for it and become something better, like, we're lesser than now. So how can we become better? And that's what I offer here. And the system itself should support what I'm doing here. Of course it won't, because the system just like, well, you guys should all go down with the ship. That's what the beast is saying. When I go down, the system goes down, you guys go down with me. And, there should be some part of the system, but there's no health in the system. There's no health in the system. And I'm not talking about physical health. I'm talking about, it's just so evil that it wants to take all you down with it, right? On a spiritual level, on a physical level. And, on every, like if the system goes down, it's too big to fail. And we don't care what happens to you if it goes down. Even though the system's supposed to be there to serve you. And so the system should support pockets of the future. The very few people who can rise up to this idea and start preparing for what's happening, and create some kind of community and start living now the way everyone's going to be in the future. There has to be people that do that to save humanity, right? And unfortunately, there's none. There's no pockets of the future. Like in terms of, there's no communities. I mean, I don't know I don't know what you guys are doing in your own individual lives. Again, it doesn't have to come through me. But for the most part, there is no pockets of the future, right? Like they've gone all in on this system and aren't even willing to look at. And I'm not talking about the preppers, and I'm talking about willing to rise to a higher level of consciousness. And sadly, what the collapse of the Sajmark system into the Heartfulness cult, and just the influence that my channel is pretty much non-existent. It might help you guys with your lives. It might, whatever it is. But again, it's a failure. Maybe it's my failure. I mean, maybe I didn't do a good enough job. When we all know that isn't true. Not because I didn't do a good enough job. There's nothing that can be done to elevate human beings right now. And maybe things are happening internally, and maybe they'll get it, when they have to get it. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But right now, in terms of, this idea of pockets of the future, it's not happening. And, there was a thing here. There was something that was, there should be millions of people listening to these videos. And these things, like this voiceover, I'll lose about half my audience who just don't want to hear this, right? The people who, are just here for the jokes or whatever. And so, again, we're talking about hundreds of people, maybe thousands, few thousand. It's nothing. Like in terms of, this is a global YouTube channel. This is a global platform. There's people listening to me all around the globe. And, I have this divine vision that I was given. And, it's like there's almost no effect, right? And the worse it gets outside, the more people will be like, oh, the more times that I've been right about things, not because I've been right, again, divinity contacted me and said, there was the divine forces gave me an assignment, and, whatever I did, good, failure, success, whatever, I've consistently put out the message in various ways. I've used various examples of what's going on in the world, showing you what's happening in the world. Showing you that, what this system is. Showing you that the people who succeed in this system go mad and become deviant, decadent people who have miserable lives, who are disconnected from the divinity within them. And all of it, right? From the humanity. The people who become rich and famous, which is the goal of the system, and powerful, are like wrecked. I've showed you over and over again. Like I've showed everybody. Millions of people have seen it. And see it, like just not me, everybody. There's that's coming out all over the place. In truther channels and non-truther channels, mainstream media, the example of, okay, this is your goal to be successful in this system, to be rich and famous. This is your goal. Okay, yeah, that's your goal. What happens to the people that reach that goal? There's only, some people who are going to rise to the top economically and, all these different ways. And to the person, they fail. Like they fail as human beings, and they become worse than what they were before. So the goal of humanity, if the people who reach the goal become worse after they've reached the goal, that's not a goal. That tells you everything you need to know about the system. If your goal is to have a good material life and, ultimately become rich and famous, look at all these internet famous people, and all of them, they turn into worse people. They just become obnoxious and selfish, and they degrade right in front of you. And so that's a failed system, because if you do what the system says to do, you seek happiness through wealth and fame and power, you'll be a worse person, and you'll make the world a worse place, and you'll die miserable and alone. Like that we've seen it. It's played out. So what's the solution? Well, connect to the divinity within you. Can have a spiritual purpose. Find out what your soul's purpose is, not what your ego's purpose. If you live your ego wants fame and power and these things, and when the ego gets it, all these people, they're miserable on top of it. They're less happy. So if they're saying, "Hey, this is going to make you happy, become rich and famous," it's been documented. The experiment's over. It's the knowledge of what happens to rich and famous people is they're more miserable, they're not happy, and they're worse people. And that's it. It's done. We know that. And I don't have to document it anymore, but I do because people, let's look at more of this. That's all that people are willing to even comprehend. And then so what do? You have to find a goal then. You have to find another goal. If being rich and famous and being, successful materially isn't the goal, I mean, that might be part of what you're supposed to do because it's your destiny. But, what's your real goal? Well, it's to find the, divine self within and embrace the best version of yourself and surrender your ego to your soul and your soul's purpose and, become the manifestation of the inner self, right? The self of the big us within, right? And that goal has been around for a long time, and people just don't like it. And even spiritual people, saints who, pursue that goal, at some point they fail. They become, sort of celebrity oriented. People start gravitating to them, and they start feeling themselves, and they forget God, and they start thinking of themselves as God, and they start, becoming, cult leaders instead of. And this happened, even to Jesus. Like there's, Jesus had, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? It's a moment of doubt and lack of faith because he had a spiritual fall because he started serving the people and he forgot about God. This whole idea that he was, divinely, whatever's a divine birth is not here. It's not true. He was working spiritually, and then he became, a figure, and he started to feel his ego started to grow like this happens. It's happened over and over again. So even people who rose up to high levels, or at least above the level of other human beings, they reach a level where their ego starts thinking it's about them and not about God, and they forget their purpose, and they become these pseudo celebrities, saintly celebrities, and they have some kind of a fall. And it's sad. It's whatever it is, tragic. That's sad. It's the limitations of human beings. So I'm going to cover this in the Journey Series 150. I've just completed 149. It's a 10-hour video that's been uploaded. And so and I got to start making some of these origin stories public, and I'll do that pretty soon. But in terms of the membership thing that's there, but in this one I'll talk about. There's going to be a voiceover I do today explaining, my specific role in these things in a more, things that's meant for the Journey series, right? But in general, this is the Pockets of the Future experiment, and I'd have to say that overall, it's a failure, and it's not my failure because, I've done the work. The work is, the work is yours, and the results are God's, right? And that's, anybody becomes a spiritual person, and it's something that I had to go through, and I'll talk about that in the Journey series, and that'll be, done when, a month or so. So this audio will be in that Journey series, so it'll be there for that too. But I'll put that audio before this. It'll be the introduction to the Journey series, and I'll answer this person's comment, and so the two things will go together. But, I've done the work to the best of my ability. Like I'm a slacker and, whatever. I'm not all that concerned with humanity, and if the whole thing goes tits up, I don't care. I'm not sentimental. I'm not, there's things I like about the system. There's things that I personally would miss. People I personally would miss, There's some great things about humanity and human beings. And, it's something I would like to see save itself, whatever it is. But our system won't. People themselves, sure. But the system, no. But I mean, people do what they do. Like, there's a choice point. There's choice point right now, and there's a choice point when the collapse starts happening, and people will face a choice. Are you going to go up, or are you going to go down? Are you going to rise up to higher levels and pull something out of your spiritual and your etheric potential, and you're going to embrace the best version of yourself that exists, that you've been avoiding. Most people are terrified of the darkness within them. The beast within, the depraved person that comes out in war and, comes out in certain situations where, some kind of violent, dark, like just animalistic and, whatever, murderous type of person exists, right? The person that, the worst version of yourself, or the most selfish, and, whatever it is. People to repress that part of themselves. And they're terrified of the beast within, right? But they're even more terrified of the saint. They're even more terrified of the best version of themselves. And you can see it. That part of them comes out, and they feel great, and they feel God's love, and they feel congruent, and they're with their soul, and their soul like emanates out. Like, everyone has moments like that in their life. And they immediately try to close the tap and not be a conduit for divine love to flow through them, right? And that's what the work here is to be a conduit. The Sagemark system, a preceptor, the work is to be a conduit. And to whatever degree I've been a conduit here, I've done, you can't evaluate your own work, but adequate work. Like, I've got the job done. I've made lots of content, and I've included these simple messages in all different formats and all different metaphors and different ways. I've explained it, over and over again. A very simple message of divinity within you, and the need to prepare for what's happening, and become something, the better version of yourself, and reach up to a higher level of consciousness. I've said it in so many different ways, and I've included it in all these videos, and lots of people get turned off by it because they can't rise up to it, right? They get mad that I say this thing over and over again in different ways because they don't want to hear it. That's the truth. They like the stuff I do. They want the jokes, whatever. Play Freebird, right? They want the remedial stuff. And that's not really why my channel's here. The remedial stuff is there so that people who can't embrace or gravitate to the higher level stuff, have at least, a subliminal level. At least they hear these things. And then it might become something of value in the future life. I don't know. The connections are being made to something. But there are choice points coming up. But in terms of this choice point, where you're seeing what's going to happen and preparing for it, the Pockets of the Future movement is a failure. And not because, just me and my channel, but because the writing's on the fucking wall, right? The writing's on the motherfucking wall. Like, you can see it. The system's collapsing. And it might not be tomorrow, but it's, in the collapse process. And so what are you going to do? And, hoarding some food, okay, that's something. But, what about you as a person? What the system has made you into is not okay. You're not okay, right? You know it. Like, everybody knows it. We're not okay in what we've been made into. But for the most part, people don't want to rise up to something and become something better. And that's what evolution's all about. We talk about material evolution. We're a creature. Like, we have, dolphins and whales and manatees and seals and things like this, penguins. They're land animals. I mean, penguins are birds. And they've adopted to sea life, right? Like, they've evolved to be something else, to where they can swim really fast. But they used to be animals that ran. They used to have legs and, whatever, right? And so that's physical evolution. But spiritual evolution is becoming something more. You have a better version of you out there. You have, your high level. You have a saint within. And you're terrified of that. People are terrified of that because their ego doesn't want to lose control. And so they're not willing to embrace that part of themselves. And, we all struggle with it. I'm not, like a success story. I mean, to whatever degree I am, like, I could do better, and every person could. everyone could embrace their higher nature at a better level. And we don't want to. And that's just reality. That's what we are. And so, my channel's dying now because of the YouTube squeezing it out. And I mean, it's not growing, it's shrinking. That's been happening for a while. But even if it wasn't, what if it was millions of people and it was just going to a lower level, But you see that there are, people out there and messages being given that are of a remedial, like someone like Joe Rogan, right? Like he's not really a truther and he's not, a pockets of the future person, but he talks a little bit about these things. And he has, a large audience. And there's people, Tucker Carlson has a large audience, these people. But they're they suck. I mean, they're lightweights, right? And then there's people who are, just the crappy content out there. And I am grateful for the audience I do have because a lot of them are thoughtful, they're higher level people, at least in terms of their potential. There's just a lot of dopes, and I have no tolerance for people who, they're not my audience, right? People who they're just don't have the capacity, and I'm not, running them down. They don't have the capacity to understand this message, sadly, because it's a simple message. It's not rocket science. It's not, you don't have to be a saint to understand it. You just have to have a potential saint within you. And everybody has that to some degree. But lots of people, they're not even, they're so dead inside and their consciousness is at such a low level. They can't even get this simple message. Just to understand that there needs to be pockets of the future. Like, just everything that I've said here. There's so many people, you'll see that this video will get less views than my normal videos. And this is a more profound, it's more important than my, making fun of Britney dancing, right? It just is. Like, it's significantly more important. The Britney stuff is there so that people can hear the other stuff, even if they don't like it or they don't understand it or it scares them. At least they hear it, right? At least they're in connection with it, so it's there for them in the future. But there's the preparatory stuff, the preparation phase. You're in that phase. How do I use the resources at my disposal? Free time. These are your resources. Free time, tools, information. And you could store food. Things like that. You have a lot of material resources right now. You have free time, right? You have the system of tools and education system where you can learn to do things, right? Like, let's say the internet goes out tomorrow and you're like, oh, I want to grow food now. Let me go search a video on how to grow and harvest food, and it's not there. So you can accumulate books and, whatever you can accumulate, like the YouTube, if you have the higher level YouTube accounts, you can download videos, for example. Like, people can download all the videos they need to help them, you can play those videos in a time when there's no internet and things like that, right? You can download, books on Kindle. There's things like that. Information. You can be storing away information. You can pack away food, canned foods and things like this. Just having some period of time where you're adjusting to having to survive and learning survival skills, right? How to protect yourself, how to, these things. There's things like that. Then you can start meditating in your free time, connect to God, and be someone that God says, all right, this person has potential. I'm going to help them. Because if you volunteer for this, God will accept, right? So if you start doing the Sajmarg meditation and you're somebody who's going to rise up to a higher level spiritually and become a person of, significance in a post-apocalyptic world, even on a soul level, you die and you're going to come back in because you're going to, you're somebody who can do it and is willing to do it. You're saying to God, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to be a part of this evolutionary movement, right? And so those are there's lots of resources and, free time being the number one resource. You have free time. What are you doing with your free time? Whatever. So that's that, and I'm not bummed about it, because, I'm never bummed about humanity's capacity to, choose low. Like I've seen it my whole life. I was aware of it. You probably even coming into this life, I'm definitely aware of it. I've seen it before in past existences. I experienced it myself. I'm a part of the problem. It's just there, right? And so there it is. And so, I'm going to keep on going here. I'll change the format, whatever it is. But at this point, the writing's on the M and wall. I mean, in terms of, there should be millions of people who are connecting to this channel. I mean, even like 100,000, and there's, almost nobody. Like it's, in terms of the higher level content, it's maybe a couple thousand, maybe less. And that's just, the reality of the situation. So that's pockets of the future. Okay, so I want to add something here. I'm not going to do the CNN piece because it doesn't make any sense. Just put that on the end of an hour-long introduction. I just ate breakfast, and I wanted to explain one more part of this thing. In terms of doing divine work, the reason that, in a sense, if I was chosen or there's some, whatever reason I was given the shruti, is because I was willing, right? I offered my services to God. I said, I don't really have much of a, ambition or purpose for myself, and I was really completely impressed by the Sajmark system of meditation and the connection to divinity that it afforded me. And so I said I was willing to do work, right? Like I would, whatever I could be useful for. And I was open to that. And, I surrendered that. Through the meditative process, I said to God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll be of service, right? And I mean, I don't want to make that sound more, or it's just that, right? It's just the willingness to, it's not some impressive thing. Whatever capacity I have, whatever, God could use me for, which was a YouTube channel, right? It was to talk on a YouTube channel, make YouTube videos. It's part of my destiny. Like when I was a little kid, I was like, 7 years old. I got a little movie camera, and I went to the circus, and I, because I wanted to make a movie about tigers or something, like whatever. And that was the tigers I had access to. But I had interest in filmmaking or this kind of, using this kind of genre, this kind of platform. And so that was already there. It was part of, who I was who I was going to be as a person. But, I made the conscious decision to say to God, use me for whatever. I'll do whatever work that you want me to do. And so that was this. Like, God puts you in a situation where you can succeed, and where you're not going to be asked to do something you don't have the talent for, you don't have the abilities for, and you have these qualities. Everyone has a gift. Everyone has something to offer humanity. Everyone has something that they can offer to God as a form of service and gratitude, and be a part of the divine plan. And I made my willingness to do that in meditative, I would say almost like conversations with God, or me saying, me volunteering to do this, right? And so, there's people who do that. There's lots of people who ask God, if they could, they volunteer themselves to do service for God. Sometimes it's for religions, religious purposes, and it's more of a material thing. They serve the poor, they go out and do, volunteer work to help people, because that's their level of evolution, right? Where they're able to, they're not able to go to higher levels of consciousness. They're not connected to God in an etheric way. They're not becoming spiritual people. They're just, their connection to God is through a religion. And so they do material work, right? They do acts of service to people, right? Which everybody should do. Like just in general, everyone should help their brothers and sisters and the, animals or whatever. Nature. I mean, we should all be, doing things to make the world a better place. But, to have the capacity, whatever your capacity is, that's what you're going to be used for, right? Your highest level of your capacity. And for me, it was to do this YouTube channel. That was the highest level of the capacity that I was able to do, to create the Gratefullness meditation channel when the heartfulness failed and these things. And so, whatever level that I'm on, whatever level this work is, there's been movements like this. There's been, higher developed souls that come down and have created, a outreach programs to help people become the better version of themselves, to help them embrace the divinity within. And, we all know Jesus because we grew up in the West, and he's a more recent person, but there's been thousands upon thousands, some of them, more evolved, some of them less evolved, some of them a higher nature. And there's been all these divine beings and people who are saints and spiritual people, maybe hundreds of thousands of them, right? People who are working for God and have a message from God to deliver to humanity, right? Whatever it is. And, my work here is also, encapsulated in the bigger work of the Saj Marg Masters, the Babaji and the Charji and the Lalaji, these three guys, and, their overall work, it's a part of that, right? It's a continuation of that movement, right? But there's these movements that come about, and inevitably what happens is lower level people who don't have, they haven't given themselves to serve, up to serve God, right? Will, hijack the movement. And you see this with every major religion. Especially you see it, most recently with Christianity. There are people who are sucky, materialistic, opportunistic, demonic people who have taken Jesus' teachings and turned it into something where they have power over people's connection to God, where they become a gatekeeper and a middleman. And, this happens over and over again. But human beings in themselves, when Jesus was alive, his disciples failed, right? Because, the religion became, corrupt. And, one disciple betrayed him in Judas, one denied him in Peter, and one doubted him in Thomas. So 3 of his 12, and then all the people who turned on him, who followed him for a while but turned on him when he was crucified, right? These things. And that's what humanity does. And so no matter how it's packaged, and no matter who delivers the message, whatever capacity the message is delivered, human beings always react the same way, where they reject it, the majority of them. And the ones who don't reject it, they struggle. They partially accept it, or they rise up for a little bit, then they go back, and this is what humanity does, right? And for what I'm doing here, my participation in it, it's no shock to me, because I know this, right? I know that no matter how good a job you do, it doesn't matter, because human beings don't want this, right? That's the problem. Human beings don't want the higher; they want the lower. They keep on going down to the lower. It's easy to sell the lower. Like, I know what the lower is, and I could go make a YouTube channel that delved into the lower and delved into the, I even include the lower in this channel, right? It's not like, this channel has the lower. I bring lower stuff, to talk about the divine stuff. The lower stuff is the clickbait. When people say your channel's a clickbait, well, it's because, the lower stuff has to be presented because the majority of people want no part of the higher. And that's just humanity. Like, that's where we are. And it's either going to change or it's not. Either we're going to be wiped out or we're going to rise up. Like, there's a choice point coming. Like, this is the end, this is the end of the lower, right? It's been, this indulging in the lower. And that's it. It's, there's a period of time where this was allowed or whatever it is, and that time is over. And human beings either have to embrace the higher or are going to be, replaced and, wiped out or whatever, like a replacement population. Maybe the dolphins, maybe something else, right? Maybe, whatever. Animals will, I don't know how it's going to be. But whatever it is, human beings are now on the clock to make a choice. And for the most part, they've always chose the lower. And that's for each of us individually, and people, even the higher developed people struggle with this. And so it's not a surprise that it's, there's been some failure here. But, there's going to be a time where the lower won't be as easily available because the system will collapse and people just, will be trying to survive and dealing with the failure of their ancestors, right, that have left them a post-apocalyptic world. And so, that's what humanity's facing. And, it'd be good to embrace the higher when you don't have to. People will be forced to do it in the future for their very survival. And that's, that it's just going to be, the lower won't be available, so people will have to embrace the higher. And the people who don't embrace the higher will perish and disappear. Their soul won't be allowed here, even on the planet. And so that's, that's what's up, right? So, in that situation, maybe human beings, if they're forced to, but again, I don't know. I'll never underestimate human beings' predisposition to embrace the lower. So, anyways, that's the ode to pockets of the future here. This is, the inevitable. I mean, this was going to happen. This was, the dwindling and the suppression and the lack of interest and the, all of it. This was, it's inevitable. I mean, I can see it now, and I, could have probably seen it in the beginning because, this is what people do and this is how people respond. So anyways, I'll keep on plugging away here because, as far as I'm concerned, the assignment isn't over, but I've accepted, the inevitable outcome. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paramount, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.